Hello and welcome to Atlantic Debrief, the Atlantic Council Europe Center's podcast on the most pressing issues impacting the transatlantic relationship today. My name is Jörn Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council, and we're excited to be doing a mini-series of our Atlantic Debriefs following the release of our report on the Transatlantic Horizons, a collaborative US-EU policy agenda for 2025 and beyond. As we navigate elections and leadership change on both sides of the Atlantic, this report aims to set a productive vision for transatlantic partnership and transatlantic cooperation between the United States and the European Union for years to come. And we're trying to build here a forward-looking policy agenda for US-EU cooperation for the next US administration and the next European Commission especially. And to discuss one of the pieces in that report, my guests today are Maja Piscevic and Ilva Tare. A warm welcome. Maja is a non-resident senior fellow with the Europe Center and our representative in the Western Balkans, and Ilva is a resident senior fellow with the Europe Center and the host of our well-known Balkans Debrief podcast series. So Maja and Ilva, a warm welcome. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Maja and Ilva co-authored a section on working on a new transatlantic approach toward the Western Balkans. This is a key issue for the Europe Center. We've had a long-established, vibrant, a very active Balkans program in our Balkans Forward initiative within the Europe Center. And we have invested heavily in the region in working and analyzing and convening on the Euro-Atlantic future of the Western Balkans. And so it's great to have this piece as part of our Transatlantic Horizons US-EU policy agenda report. I want to start with the basics, Maja and Ilva, and that is, what is the bottom line of your policy brief on the Western Balkans, and why should Washington and Brussels care about the region, invest in the region, and stay engaged in the region? So, Maja, give us the bottom line up front.
Thank you, Jörn. I might surprise you, but I will start with a quote of Winston Churchill, who said about the Balkans famously, I'm not sure if that's true, but allegedly he did, that the Balkans produce more history than they can consume. And unfortunately, I don't know how true this statement was back then when he said that, but today it's definitely, I would say, the case. Western Balkans is still stuck geographically and emotionally between East and West, and between the future and the past. And the new game in town is unfortunate invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and that even further increased the geopolitical importance of the region in the constant context of Europe and Europe security and Euro-Atlantic partnership. We see that this region is at different scales, but exposed to different malign interests, most notably by Russia, but as important, I would say, just in a different way, of China. And that's something that the West, primarily, I would say the EU, because of its own security reason, is watching carefully in the past 2 years, and will remain hopefully focused on this region in the coming years.
Thank you, Maja. Ilva, if I can turn to you, in your policy brief, you note a sort of conflicting sense when visiting the region. One, on the one hand, of tremendous potential and a hopeful future. On the other hand, you talk about a chaotic feedback loop, given history, given ethnic strife, given the legacy challenges. Can you unpack that a little bit more for our audience and tell us why that matters.
Jörn, the conflicting feelings, as you rightly point out, come from the complex reality that you find when you are in the Balkans and when you know the Balkans. On one hand, as you mentioned, there is this optimism for the region's European future, with countries aspiring to become part of the European Union. In the NATO, 3 out of 6 countries are already NATO members, and there are other aspiring NATO members. But on the other hand, there is this disillusionment due to political instability, due to high corruption, and lack of, and I'm going to emphasize this, lack of tangible progress when it comes to governance, good governance practices, and reforms. Political will, we know it very well here, but in the region probably it still needs to be reinforced. It's not just statements made publicly, either when you meet EU leaders or when you are in Brussels. Political will needs to be translated into impactful reforms and necessary reforms that these countries need to do in order to progress their EU integration. So in this area, I think there is a lack of concrete implementation and good results when it comes to reforms. And the US and the EU is necessary to coordinate and shown then, yes, they have publicly supported and promoted the EU integration of the region. But I think different and more concrete mechanisms should be put in place to monitor the real progress of the region. Let's take, for instance, the dialogue, Serbia and Kosovo dialogue. The US has been seated in the supportive chair and has been led the European Union to lead and to facilitate the dialogue. But so far, we have no results. So the outcome is not what we expected and what we all want. So in this case, I think the challenge now is for both Washington, D.C. and for Brussels to coordinate more effectively and leverage their respective strengths in the region, because they are both authoritative, they have leverage in the most of the countries, I would say, in the Western Balkans. Because to the point that Maja mentioned, the rise of Russian or even Chinese influence in the region only underscores this urgency for a recalibrated, or we can find whatever names we want, but unified strategy that achieves the results that we all want. Montenegro is another telling case in this will of going towards the EU and then having a moment. Then you have this country is a NATO member, was a EU frontrunner, and now it's currently governed by a coalition that includes a pro-Russian party, while we have Russia's ongoing aggression in Ukraine. So this contradiction, this is what I meant by conflicting feelings. This contradiction highlights the fragility of progress in the region, and also the risks that come with the lack of cohesive transatlantic oversight.
So you've already put a lot on the table there, Ilva. I want to go back to Maja and see what you would add, Maja, in terms of the key dynamics in the region to look out and the key things that U.S. and European policymakers you think will have to address, deal with, watch out for.
Yes, Ilva has very well painted the general picture in the Balkans, which is not easy because each of the countries has its own history and its own path to the EU. Some are more honest, some are not, some are less corrupt governments, some a little bit more. So it's very, very different. But I would say that the key role of the West, and I really say, as they would like to say to Sputnik, collective West, the role of West, it would really be to balance between geopolitics and democracy. And that's extremely easy. The previous period has shown us that. And we've seen that both the United States and European Union have, unfortunately, primarily focused on geopolitics and kind of closed their eyes on democratic problems. And they're huge. And I firmly believe that no economic progress or economic integration of the region, let alone convergence with the EU, can happen on the basis of endangered democratic freedoms, institutions which hold no trust or small levels of trust by the citizens, inefficient courts, corruption at all levels. No economic growth will really lead to sustainable progress unless and until these basic fundamental values are imposed. And that would be a huge challenge. I have to say, I'm not a huge optimist that this will take place, but we will continue to work and help for that to happen.
Thank you, Maja. You both set out some very specific, detailed policy recommendations for decision makers in Washington and in Brussels and across Europe to take that agenda that Maja already outlined, take that agenda forward. Can you take us through some of these recommendations briefly? And also, Maja already hinted at this, democracy, rule of law, the promotion thereof is, you say, should be at the center of a US EU agenda in the Western Balkans, and maybe just highlight some of the things that Maja already mentioned. So policy recommendations and why democracy, rule of law, transparency, accountability ought to be at the center of a US EU agenda in the Western Balkans. Ilva.
I fully agree with Maja. She excellently put it that democracy is paramount, is fundamental in the region, because without it, the region risks becoming entrenched in corruption, governance failures, and prone to the external influences that we already mentioned. Only a robust, a really solid democracy and democratic institutions can provide the foundation for everything else. And yes, we did put a long list of recommendations, and they talk about economic development, security cooperation, stability. But in the end, this all will come after democracy is in place and is well protected, and starting from free and fair elections. And the Western powers should say clearly when they are not free and fair. In the case of the Western Balkans, not to have these vague statements that accepts on one hand the elections, but on the other hand doesn't clearly identify the problems, which will not help the countries. So rule of law is another key point. Strong institutions, as I mentioned, none of the region's broader aspirations can be realized without this. So yes, we propose several lists from anti-corruption, more support from Brussels and the US to train, technical support, funds. Listen, in the region, as I said, and Maja mentioned this beautifully. Yes, the leaders are very, very well. How can I put this? They speak good English. They speak very good national language, and they are using now to speak in different to convey different concepts in the different languages. When they speak English, they speak for foreigners. When they speak in their own language, they speak for their national narrative. And this is not helping the progress of the region overall. If I was clear what I was saying. So yes, justice reform, rule of law, civil society empowerment. There is this need for more pressure, more push from the civil society to protect the democracy. Also, by doing this, we will have what everyone wants in the region, and the US has been promoting some initiatives, and we have the Senator Shaheen legislative act that mentions the need for economic development and for investments in the region. But in order to go there, we need the rule of law. We need the judicial system in place. And one other recommendation, and this hopefully we can have some progress in that, is a new format, a reinvigorated Serbia-Kosovo dialogue, where we propose that the EU and the US must lead together this new format of a dialogue and indeed prioritizing normalization, but on the other hand, offering in the table of the discussions of the dialogue clear incentives that will link to concrete progress. Because as we know, so far, we have a lot of tension in place in those countries.
Thank you, Ilva. So we're going to wrap up by me asking you your one, because you do put a lot of recommendations on the table, your one recommendation in your policy brief, that's your favorite. I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Maja, I'll start with you. Your number one recommendation from your policy brief, and then we'll go to Ilva and wrap up.
It's hard. I could say in general rule of law, and that would encompass everything that I'm thinking about. But for some reasons, and looking at these technology breakthroughs that we're witnessing every day, power of social network, disinformation, and so on, it will be the freedom of media. Independent media is something that Balkans miss the most. And I'm sorry, because I know that this is the same thing that my friend Ilva would say as a journalist.
You just stole my favorite.
Anyway, Ilva has to pick another one. So Ilva, your second favorite recommendation.
I'll go for civil society. They go hand to hand with media, so I'll go for the civil society empowerment.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's all we have time for. Everyone should check out, everyone in the audience should check out our Transatlantic Horizons, a collaborative US-EU policy agenda for 2025 and beyond, our report that goes far beyond and covers the whole spectrum of the US-EU partnership and US-EU cooperation. Check out the Western Balkans piece by our fellows Ilva Tare and Maja Piscevic. Thank you for joining us today. More of these to come to cover all of the different policy briefs that are part of this overall report to set a forward-looking US-EU agenda. Thank you very much, Ilva and Maja. Thank you to our viewers for joining us. Watch out for more.
Thank you.